Hello, Professor Bennett here. Now, this week we are going to really focus on evaluating materials. And to do that, we are going to use a method called ACT UP. And that is just an acronym to help you walk through some steps of what to look for while you are evaluating materials. So, the reason that we are talking about this is because it is extremely important to think critically about the information that you are processing, especially so when you are finding information on the internet. Um, because as we all know, the abundance of information of online does not always equal quality information. Um, that does not mean that the information is not relevant or maybe even good for your topic. Um, when we're looking at resources and things that you find with the library, like a book or a scholarly article that you get to through the library website, that has already gone through an evaluation process. So you don't have to think about evaluating quite as much at that point. But when you're looking at news sources online, social media, the abundance there is just really overwhelming. And being able to stop and say, okay, let me think through this, let me evaluate this, the credibility of this, it can help reduce the false spread of information. All right, ACT UP. A, author. C, currency. T, truth. U, unbiased, and P, privileged. We're going to go through all of these in a little more depth. The author, this is usually where I begin when I am evaluating a piece of information, because a lot of times it's easiest to find out more about who wrote it than it is some of these other things. So who is responsible for this piece of information that you are reading or viewing or processing? Who wrote it? Who created it? Is it an individual? Is it a group? Is it an organization? Think through all of those things. And then the background on who that is. A lot of times it'll be academic affiliation. Is this a professor at a certain university? Did they get their degree from a certain place? What is their degree in? Are they actually an expert on this thing that they are writing about or talking about? Have they written other articles or produced other things related to this topic? Do they have life experiences that would give them the authority to say what they are saying? And then there are other credentials, just kind of depending on what it is that you are looking at. But usually you can kind of match those experiences, those credentials and affiliations with this topic or piece of information. And hopefully it's a good match. It's a pretty good indicator. All right, C, the currency of a thing. When was it written or published? This is important when you consider the nature of your topic. And I have on here, obviously, historical events versus trends in healthcare. For historical events, depending on the event, maybe you're looking at a piece of information that was written at the time, which makes it an excellent resource for you. However, if it were a trend in something or healthcare or technology, probably you don't want to look past the last 5 years. It starts to get pretty dated because things change quickly in those sectors. So just consider what it is you're working on, and does this piece of information match what you need at this time? Truth. Is what you are reading true? Sometimes this can be difficult to assess. I will say it's most applicable to websites because there aren't other kind of checks and balances in place. Anyone can put what they want on a website. One simple thing to look for is spelling and grammatical errors. So it's like, okay, well, you used the wrong your. Okay, you don't seem very credible now. I know for me, if I see a misspelling, credibility goes way down. Something else, if something when determining truth, look at multiple sources. So don't just find one website that presents this piece of information, look at the others. And if they're all saying the same thing, more than likely there's at least some truth to it. Okay, the U, unbiased. This is a tricky thing to think about because it's human nature to be biased. And it's not always the most terrible thing. It's just we need to recognize it. With that, noting what is the intent of this piece of information or this thing that you are looking at. Is the intent of this, we'll say, article to sell you something or convince you of a certain idea? Or is it just to lay out the facts as they have been found according to such and such study? Really, it very much so comes down to the intent of the piece of information, and a lot of that is going to be web-based. That's where you're going to have more intent to sway you to a certain way of thinking or intent to sell you on something rather than just straight presenting the facts. With the unbiased piece, looking at the URL and is this a .com, a .org, .edu, that can give you a little clue as to whether or not this is intent to sell, educate, or sway your thinking. And we'll talk more about that. Privilege, that is the P in our ACT UP. A lot of this ties back to who created this piece of information. Are they the only ones who are publishing or creating on this topic? Who is missing from the conversation? So have certain groups been excluded from a topic area that would, that would be necessary to get a more well-rounded understanding, maybe. And then sometimes you can look at subject terms associated with a topic and identify missing groups. And so this is something that is really kind of becoming more common to look at. So if, well, I'll just use children's literature as an example. We are now seeing more authors of color, authors of diversity contributing to the pool of children's literature. And it's great because for some years they were missing. So something to keep in mind, you may not always be able to easily identify this when you're looking at materials, but just keep it in your mind that this does exist. Also, when we talk about privilege, the kind of flip side of this is the privilege of information access. So not only who is in the information, but who can get to it. As students at MSU, you have information privilege because we, your library, pay for you to have access to all of this information that the general public will never hope to see. So again, just something to think about in our world. The abundance of information is out there, but it's not always available to everyone. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about what you have access to. And of course, this week now, you're going to go back and practice this. And let's go